Yeah, so here today to speak to Chris Hickman, Chief Security Officer from a company called Keyfactor. I've known Chris for quite a while, and it's a pleasure to have you here and have a casual conversation about, well, everything and anything you like, really.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting me to do this talk.
No worries. I think the first topic, but probably a slightly different angle to it, PQC.
Yes, I've heard of it anyways.
Yeah. What was the quote? It's only 3 letters. How hard can it be?
That exactly. How hard can it be, right?
Indeed. Part of the drive of PQC, NIST came out with the standards last year. The advice industry was giving was around planning, and that we've noticed, well, in my opinion, started this year, that changed into, you need to start taking a crypto inventory.
Yep.
If I take a step back slightly from that, what are your thoughts about how, say, customers or partners and the general education of sort of starting that journey for PQC and making that awareness sort of more well known?
Yeah, we're starting to see more action than talk, which is nice progression. If we were sitting here 12 months ago, let's say, a lot of education, a lot of hoeing and humming, and is this really a thing type of conversation and language? But we're actually seeing organizations now starting to take that step into, okay, we know now we need to do something, helped in great part with the publication of the paper with the timelines to deprecate classical algorithms. So now we have a combination of standards, and we've got a timeline for deprecation. People have really started to put in motion a plan. Do I think people are where they should be in their plan? That would be a very different story, but at least something is starting to happen.
Yeah, that's what we're finding is like, it's good that there's a bit of inertia started, there's planning sort of in motion. Are the plans as far down the track as what they probably should be or need to be? Maybe not, but at least this time we've made a start and sort of walking that path a lot better. One of the things that does come up with for us and our customers recently is like I say, that shift earlier this year to where it was like, right, should have done the planning, now let's start thinking about that crypto inventory. Right, the big sort of question there is discovery, and how do I discover, and what do I need to discover?
It's the right place to start. At the end of the day, you can't mitigate a risk that you can't see. So in this particular case, you need to know where all your cryptography is in the organization. And it's not just one type of cryptography. I mean, post-quantum computing puts many different types of cryptography. Obviously, from a Keyfactor standpoint, looking at certificates and asymmetric cryptography in particular, we're pretty focused on that. But one of the interesting things around the discovery piece is, one of the ways I describe it, a colleague of mine came up with this, so I'm not going to take it for original content, right, is you can look for something with a flashlight and you'll only see what the light is pointed at. You could also just turn on all the lights and see everything and realize that the room's a bit of a mess, but that's okay. But I'll go back to the flashlight example for a moment. If you're shining the flashlight in the wrong direction, you're probably going to trip over a branch that's directly in front of you. And that's what I'm most concerned about, is people are very focused on a singular thing around post-quantum and not about the entire cryptographic landscape. And that's where the inventory has to be done properly so that you can take all of that into account. And we hear that every day. Our next thing is cryptography, or the cryptography discovery and the inventory. And just at the risk of double clicking on that one too many times, it's also important that continues, because there's a lot of things that we just don't know. Once you've got the inventory, you've got to continue to refresh it to make sure that new vulnerabilities aren't being introduced into your landscape and things like that.
Right. Yeah, we see it with our customers too. They ask us, and I try and sort of give them analogies or concepts that are familiar to them in the past. So, simple things like CMDB, you go out and discover all your devices and then keep a record of, but it's not a one and done job. Yep. It has to be maintained, has to carry on. The flashlight, shining the torch on the right areas, that sort of reminds me of, people didn't quite know what their infrastructure was, and all of a sudden you had shadow IT. Yep. It's the same concept, but this time around it's is there shadow crypto? Where is it all? I don't know.
Oh, I would without a doubt say there is. Yeah, it's almost a given that there is going to be. We see it, where people, for instance, in PKI, will go and get searched from the most convenient, quickest place that they can. And it may not necessarily meet policy, or they'll stand up a tool set that's got PKI built in, but it's not really disclosed. Into, for instance, into their development pipeline, right? And all of a sudden, this becomes the lowest common denominator of security for the organization, because other people go, oh, if I just need a cert, I'll get it from there. And so, we see a lot of that sort of shadow IT coming up, shadow security as a result of, let's just make it easy.
Yeah, indeed.
But easy isn't necessarily safe.
True, very, very true.
Yeah.
I guess, probably moving on to sort of the next question, going back from PQC a bit, PKI.
Yes.
And that, it's always sort of, I guess, traditionally or historically, I can put my hand up, I feel like a baby in the room sometimes. Just, I think my 25th anniversary of working with PKI is in about 2 weeks' time. I think my first job starting date was the 14th of May.
I think you and I would be not far off the same milestone there.
So historically when it started, it was all governments and banks and not that popular.
Yep.
And then obviously as technology and explosion of the internet and everything else, it sort of became fashionable with cloud computing and the explosion of that. What are your thoughts and reflections on how it's sort of, having watched and seen the industry or PKI mature?
Yeah, it's funny. Everything old is new again. It's a renaissance for PKI over the last couple of years. Brand new use cases, driving it. I never thought in my lifetime we'd be doing things like, PKI on airplanes and PKI in cars and, all of those niche, IoT type cases, let alone everything that keeps coming to us in the enterprise. It's driven the need to, first of all, treat PKI as critical infrastructure, first and foremost, not as just an identity adjunct somewhere or, bury it under somebody's list of responsibilities, with that being the last thing if you have time to get to it. But it's also driven scales, right? And the scale of PKI in most organizations has changed significantly, but the infrastructure hasn't. So one of the things that we are seeing is a trend towards modernization of that infrastructure. Sort of go back to the PQC element, that's driving some of that thinking. We need to get to the next level, and a lot of vendors aren't there yet, whereas we're fortunate at Keyfactor that we are. But it is driving that whole modernization of the infrastructure in order to support these advanced use cases and the scale. And I know you guys are seeing that as well at Unsung.
Yeah, indeed. It's kind of funny because, I think back to say some of the first use cases, it's around S-MIME, it's around putting a cert on a smart card.
Well, probably the first thing everybody bought on the internet for the first time was an SSL cert.
Yep.
Right. The first thing you ever bought online was probably a certificate from a PKI.
Indeed. And then now we're seeing, say, some of those more advanced, with the modernization, some of those more advanced use cases. I think the coolest one we ran into probably about a month ago was one potential customer, we'll keep them nameless, was looking at putting a certificate on the robotic dog.
Okay.
And that they had a perimeter sort of security, and they were going to use the dog. They could go into places where it was a bit nicer than a human to go, and they wanted a cert on that dog and the geo-fencing and the authentication parts of that.
That makes perfect sense. Any device really needs a unique identity that's cryptographically derived, right? And then they need transport layer security, because every device is interconnected, right?
Yep.
It's your mesh of trust, your fabric of trust, and then the rest of it is just data that flows over top of it. But without those elements, well, we've been doing authentication and encryption, type layers, transport layers with PKI for a long time. Right? Why would we need to reinvent another method to do something that actually works perfectly already? So,
it's just sort of exciting now that we see these more advanced use cases, and dare I say PKI sort of maturing and becoming almost cool.
Again,
It's nice when you've been around this long, right?
It's nice to get to 25 years or something and still be relevant. So I agree.
Yeah, indeed. Going on a slight tangent, you mentioned the word sort of driven or drive to sort of modernize a PKI.
Yeah.
Knowing that you're a fan of motorsport, and
I might have watched a race or two in my life and own a car or two. So,
having seen a few cars on a few of the stands here this week, as well, what would be, you say, your favorite driver historically or now? I mean, possibly your favorite racing series.
Now you're asking me to pick my favorite child, which is never going to be easy. I've been a long fan of F1, plain and simple. I'm actually also a fan of stock car racing, North American stock car racing, NASCAR. Two completely different disciplines and for two completely different reasons. But if I had to give up one, it probably wouldn't be F1, to be very honest with you. I love the technology. I love the telemetry decisions that are made in those cars. I actually, at a recent event, had a chance to sit down with one of the directors of informatics for one of the F1 teams, and it was absolutely fascinating to see how PKI and things like that fold into their landscape and how they use technology and how they've emerged to cloud and AI and uses like that, and how they continue to push the boundaries there. And I think that is really interesting, because I don't think they've ever compromised the intention of the sport, which is make a car that goes fast and go fast in that car.
Yeah.
So there's a purist element to that too that I respect. So,
listen,
but I won't name my favorite driver ever.
Okay, fair enough. Oh, I will. My current one.
Oh, current one. Yeah.
Is Valtteri Bottas and stuff. And I know he's only a test driver this season and things like that. But he's like, not just F1 drivers are great, the reaction speed, all of that. But he just has this tongue-in-cheek kind of sense of humor, which sort of I find sets him apart from the other F1 drivers.
I can see that. I can see that for sure.
The moustache, the mullet, all of that sort of thing. Well, we won't hold you up anymore.
I'm not holding me up.
Enjoy more of the sort of San Francisco sunshine. But thank you for your time today for a conversation about crypto and everything else.
Anytime, Todd. Have me back if you will.
Will do.
Wonderful.
Cheers. Thank you.